On the 22nd of December, 1944, a German surrender demand reached the American commander inside Bastogne. The German corps at Bastogne was the 47th Panzer Corps, and the officer commanding it was Heinrich von Luttwitz. By then, his gunners had had several days to work on the American artillery inside the town, and counter-battery work is what they would have been doing with them. Direction, caliber, and with enough of both, a place on a map. There was one thing about those guns that no instrument they owned could return, and it is the reason we are here. Counter-battery work is not guesswork, it is arithmetic, and the men who did it were trained for it. You listen, you measure, you dig into the craters and read the fragments and the angle of the ground, and the numbers come back, and the numbers are usually right. So we will do it their way. Take the German gunners outside Bastogne and go through what their arithmetic could return to them, one item at a time, because the list is short and the last item on it is missing. 4 of the 5 things you would want to know about an enemy battery are arithmetic. The 5th one is not, and no army on earth had an instrument for it, because you cannot hear a regulation in an incoming shell. Hold on to that sentence. By the end of this, it is going to mean something very specific, and not a comfortable something. The first thing they could solve for was direction. Sound ranging is old work by 1944. You put microphones out along a baseline, you time the arrival of the report at each one, and the difference in those times gives you a bearing. Do it from 2 places, and the bearings cross, and the crossing is your gun. The second thing was caliber. A shell tells you what fired it. The fragments have a thickness. The crater has a shape. A 105mm gun and a 155mm gun do not leave the same hole in Belgian farmland, and any experienced battery officer can stand in one and know which he is looking at. The third thing was position, refined. Bearings and crater work and, when the weather allowed it, an observer with field glasses. Done patiently, over days, that is how a besieging force builds a map of the guns it cannot see. And the fourth thing was rate. How often those guns fired, whether the rate was falling, because a battery that is running out of ammunition slows down before it stops, and a besieging army watches for that the way a doctor watches a pulse. Direction, caliber, position, rate. 4 items, and every one of them solvable with the instruments a German artillery staff had in 1944. Here is the 5th item, and it was not on the list because there is no instrument for it. Who? A firing solution gives you a map square. It does not give you a face. It does not tell you what country the men at that gun were born in, or what that country had decided about them, or what was written about them in a filing cabinet in Washington. You cannot hear a regulation in an incoming shell. The guns firing back at them from inside Bastogne belonged, in part, to the 969th Field Artillery Battalion. Every enlisted man in it was black. And the United States Army, in writing, 20 years before, had recorded its position on whether men like that should be doing this job at all. That is the story. Who was firing back, what their own army had already said about them, and what the war did with that answer. Take the unit first because the unit has a strange shape, and the shape matters later. There was a regiment, the 333rd Field Artillery, activated on the 5th of August, 1942, at Camp Gruber, Oklahoma. It was a segregated unit. The enlisted men were black. The officers were, for the most part, white. That was not an accident of who volunteered. That was the design. On the 10th of March, 1943, the Army split that regiment in 2. The 1st Battalion became the 333rd Field Artillery Battalion. The 2nd Battalion became the 969th. 2 battalions, 1 parent, the same men from the same camp, now with different numbers on their paperwork. Both of them got the same weapon, and it is worth knowing what that weapon was because it decides everything about who these men had to be. The M1, 155 mm howitzer, a medium howitzer towed behind a truck and one of the heaviest guns a division could count on having behind it. You do not point a howitzer at a target. You almost never see the target. Someone who can see it sends you a location, and you turn that location into numbers. Range, deflection, charge, fuse. You are solving a geometry problem in the cold, at speed, under fire. And then you are lifting shells a man cannot carry alone while you do it, and if your arithmetic is wrong, the shells land on your own infantry. That is the job the Army had given these men. Now hold that next to what the Army had written down about them. Before I show you that, one thing, and it is not the usual thing. About 20 minutes from now, I am going to reach a piece of paper from 1949. It is not a battle. Nothing explodes. It is a committee document, and it is the single most damning object in this entire story, and it is damning entirely because of what is not in it. I would like you to already be waiting for it when it arrives. Not as a favor to me. A video like this only works if you are still here when the quiet part comes, and the quiet part is where the actual argument lives. If you want the next one of these to find you when it is finished, that is what the subscribe button is for. Every person named in this story was real. Every name, every date, every unit number is in the sources under this video. I would rather you check me than trust me. In 1925, the Army War College produced a classified study. Its title was The Use of Negro Manpower in War. It was prepared under the college commandant, Major General Hanson Ely, and it leaned heavily on the testimony of white officers who had commanded black troops in the First World War. The report is not subtle, and it does not need interpreting. On the question of black officers, it states, and I am reading the line, that the Negro officer was a failure as a combat officer and should not be placed over white officers, non-commissioned officers, or soldiers. That document is the floor the whole policy stood on. It is why most black soldiers in the Second World War were routed into engineering, into labor, into stevedore work. Not all of them. There were 2 black infantry divisions, a separate infantry regiment, and a number of tank destroyer, and field artillery battalions. But the default was set, and the default was that these men would carry things. So there are 2 documents in this story. One of them is that report. The other one has not been written yet, and it will be presented in February of 1945 by a major general to the men who had held the town. And the whole distance between those 2 pieces of paper is what this video is about. Now, December 1944. By October, the 333rd was in the Ardennes, under 8th Corps, backing up the 106th Infantry Division. The 106th had never been in combat. The sector was considered quiet. That is what it was for. You put green divisions in a quiet place so they can learn the trade slowly. The 333rd was positioned near Schönberg, about 11 miles behind the front line. Its service battery sat west of the Our River. Batteries A, B, and C sat on the east side. On the early morning of the 16th of December, German artillery opened up along that quiet sector. And it was not quiet again. The guns of the 333rd fired, and kept firing, in support of infantry that was being taken apart in front of them. And then the front line stopped being in front of them. On the 17th, Schönberg fell. The service battery and Battery C tried to pull out through the village and ran straight into German fire inside it. Here is what was left of the battalion. 6 officers killed or captured, including the battalion commander, 222 enlisted men killed or taken prisoner, 9 howitzers abandoned, 34 trucks gone, 12 weapons carriers gone, 5 guns still working. 286 men came out of it. They were reassigned, some to the 578th and the rest to the 969th, the sister battalion. Same regiment, same camp in Oklahoma, and now the survivors of one were walking into the gun pits of the other. That is where the reassigned men went. 11 other men from the battalion never reached either one. 11 artillerymen from the 333rd got out of the German net on foot and walked about 10 miles, trying to reach American lines. At around 3 in the afternoon on the 17th of December, they came into a hamlet called Wereth. They were cold, they were hungry, they were worn out, and between the 11 of them they had 2 rifles. The first house in the hamlet belonged to a farmer named Matthias Langer. He took them in. His family fed them. I do not know what Langer weighed up at his own door, and nobody recorded it. I know what the situation was. This is wartime Belgium under German control. The Germans have just come back through, and he is putting 11 American soldiers inside his house. A neighbor who was sympathetic to the Germans went and told them. What arrived was a patrol of 4 men from the 1st SS Panzer Division, Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler. The unit is recorded as Schnelle Gruppe Knittel, under Sturmbannführer Gustav Knittel. The 11 men surrendered. At around 7 o'clock that evening, they were taken out of the house, into a field, and killed. I am going to stay on the documentary record here and not one word past it. When the bodies were recovered, the official report described broken legs, bayonet wounds to the head, and fingers that had been cut off. That is the report. That is what the paper says. I am not going to dramatize it, and I am not going to skip it either, because leaving it out would be its own kind of lie. They were found in a ditch at the corner of a cow pasture. It was January before anyone found them, when villagers walked a reconnaissance patrol from the 99th Division out to the spot. These are their names: Curtis Adams of South Carolina, Major Bradley of Mississippi, George Davis Jr. of Alabama, Thomas Forte of Mississippi, Robert Greene of Georgia, James Leatherwood of Mississippi, Nathaniel Moss of Texas, George Moughton of Texas, William Pritchett of Alabama, James Stewart of West Virginia, Dew Turner of Arkansas. Among the 11 there was a staff sergeant, 2 technicians, 4th grade, a corporal, 4 privates, 1st class, a technician, 5th grade, and 2 privates, one of whom was a medic. Remember that they are artillerymen. Remember that they walked 10 miles with 2 rifles. And remember the date, the 17th of December, because it will come back at the end of this, in a document from 5 years later. The men who did reach the 969th reached it just in time to be surrounded. The 969th had landed at Utah Beach on the 9th of July. Its first commander was Lieutenant Colonel Hubert D. Barnes. By the 18th of December, it was firing in support of the 101st Airborne Division at Bastogne, and it would keep doing that until the 12th of January. On the 20th of December, the ring closed. By noon on the 21st, all 7 roads into the town were cut. Inside there were something over 22,000 men. The 101st itself had about 11,000 enlisted and 800 officers, plus armor, plus tank destroyers, plus engineers, plus whatever else had been swept up and put to work, and plus the artillery. 2 Field Artillery Battalions from 8th Corps, the 755th and the 969th, alongside 2 Armored Field Artillery Battalions, the 58th and the 420th, Now put yourself back outside the ring with von Lüttwitz's gunners and those 4 numbers: direction, caliber, position, rate. Those 4 are what their instruments were built to return. And the men serving one of those batteries were firing a weapon their own army's foundational study had said black officers could not be trusted to command. Go back to the 4th number for a minute, because the 4th number is the one that was supposed to end this. Rate. How often the guns inside were firing and whether that rate was falling. For an army trying to strangle a town, that number is the whole plan. You do not have to beat artillery. You only have to outlast it. Every shell fired inside a closed ring is a shell that cannot be replaced. And the moment the rate starts to sag, you know the ring is working. And the numbers were on the German side. On the 20th of December, firing directly at German armor, the American guns in that sector went through more than 2,000 rounds in one day. And until the 23rd, the weather closed the sky completely. Nothing flew in. No resupply, no parachutes, nothing. So, for the worst 3 days of it, the arithmetic inside Bastogne was strictly subtraction. I want to be honest about what I can and cannot tell you here. I do not have a document that records what any individual German officer concluded while watching that rate. Nobody wrote that down for me. What I can tell you is what the situation was, and the situation was that a besieging force with good counter-battery work, watching a surrounded town that could not be resupplied, had every reason on paper to expect those guns to go quiet. They did not go quiet. That is not a matter of interpretation. The relief column reached the town on the 26th, and the guns were still firing when it got there. If you only stay for one more section, make it this one, because from here the story stops being about a siege and starts being about paperwork. And the paperwork is where it gets strange. Everything up to now has been the war behaving normally. Men were sent somewhere, the line broke, they fought. What happens next is the part that almost never happens, and then the part that happens far too often. The siege itself, from a gunner's position, was not dramatic in the way films are dramatic. It was volume, and it was a countdown nobody could stop. On the 22nd, the surrender demand came in, and General McAuliffe answered it with one word: nuts. On Christmas Eve, at about 7 in the evening, German bombers hit Bastogne and killed 21 people in an aid station. Then 18 tanks, with a battalion of infantry, came in against the lines of the 327th and were pushed back out. The relief came on the 26th. Contact was made at about 10 to 5 in the afternoon. Across the whole period, from the 19th of December to the 6th of January, the Americans in and around Bastogne counted 341 killed, 1,691 wounded, and 516 missing. Through all of it, direction, caliber, position, and rate were the 4 things a German gunner's instruments could return to him. There was no line on that form for the thing that turned out to matter. You cannot hear a regulation in an incoming shell. On the 7th of February, 1945, the 969th Field Artillery Battalion was awarded the Distinguished Unit Citation through 3rd Army. It was presented by Major General Maxwell Taylor, commanding the 101st Airborne. The men who had been inside the ring were decorated by the division that had been inside the ring with them. That citation went to a segregated battalion whose enlisted men were all black, at a time when the Army's own written policies said what it said. You will see it claimed that this was the first such citation ever given to a black combat unit. I can only source that one way, and a better source that discusses this exact award does not say it. so I am not going to build anything on it. There are two more things I want to be careful about here. So let me be careful out loud. That award later changed names. In 1957, the Distinguished Unit Citation became the Presidential Unit Citation, and they are the same decoration, so you will see it written both ways depending on which decade the writer is standing in. And on the question of exactly which units were covered by that particular citation, the sources I can reach do not agree with each other. So I am going to tell you only the part they all agree on. The 969th received it, on that date, from that man. Survivors of the 333rd were serving alongside them when it was earned. Take the distance between the two documents. 1925, a classified study concluding that black officers were a failure in combat and should not be placed over white men. February 1945, the commander of the most famous airborne division in the American Army pinning a unit citation on a black battalion. And look at what the two documents are actually arguing about, because they are arguing about the same thing. The 1925 report is not a complaint about marksmanship. The line I read you is a claim about combat judgment, that under pressure, men like these could not be trusted to run the job themselves. Now look at the job. A medium howitzer battery in a surrounded town is judgment and steadiness and nothing else. It is arithmetic done correctly, repeatedly, in the cold, while being shelled, with friendly infantry close enough that a bad number kills them. There is no way to fake it, and no way to hide inside it. Of every task the United States Army had available in 1944, the Army had put these men on one of the few where the reports claim could be tested directly, in public, with the answer written on the ground in craters, 20 years between them. Now, I have no document telling me what anybody was thinking when the second one was written, so take what I say next as my reading and not as a record. I do not think the citation happened because anybody had changed his mind about 1925. I think it happened because a ring closed around a town, and the guns inside it had to work, and they worked. If that reading is right, then this is not a story about the Army becoming better. It is a story about a war that could not be argued with. Now, the piece of paper I asked you to wait for. The American investigators who broke open the Malmedy massacre, the atrocity from that same offensive that everyone has heard of, also recovered the full details of what had happened at Wereth. They had it. It was in their hands. They did not pursue it. The file was classified. No one was ever positively identified as the killer of those 11 men. By 1948, the case had been put away. And then, in 1949, a subcommittee of the Senate Committee on Armed Services conducted a full review of German atrocities committed during the Battle of the Bulge. A complete review. That was the assignment. Wereth is not in it, not disputed in it, not weighed and dismissed in it. Absent. 11 American soldiers in American uniform murdered after surrendering, on the 17th of December, inside the exact battle that document was reviewing, and the review does not contain them. I said earlier there was no instrument that could tell the German gunners who was firing back at them. There is a harder version of that. For more than 70 years, there was no instrument in the United States government that could see these 11 men either. What there was a farmer's son. Herman Langer, whose father had opened the door, put up a small cross at the place in 1994, on the 50th anniversary. 10 years later, in 2004, a memorial was dedicated there, built by 3 Belgian citizens with help from an American doctor in Mobile, Alabama, whose own father had been captured in that battle. Congress passed a resolution formally recognizing the victims in 2017, 73 years after the fact. A Belgian farming family got there first by 23 years. So here is where the two halves of this meet. The 969th fired 42,489 rounds in that war. It fought under all four American armies in Europe. Its last shots were fired on the 28th of April, 1945. Not one of those shells carried a policy. Not one of them announced who had loaded it. Everything an instrument could measure about that fire, an instrument could measure. The one thing it could not return was the only thing their own ideology, and ours, had spent 20 years insisting was the important thing. You cannot hear a regulation in an incoming shell. The Army had put its opinion of these men in writing in 1925, and the war never read it, and Bastogne held. Both things in this story are true, and you have to carry both. A unit citation in February, a file that was classified, and a case that was put away in 1948. This channel does not get to keep the first one and quietly drop the second, and neither do you. Here is what I would ask you for, and it is deliberately not what I usually ask for. Every time I do one of these, I ask you for a name. Today, I want a number. If someone in your family served in a segregated unit, give me the unit, the battalion, the regiment, the battery. You do not need to know a single man's name in it, and that is deliberate. What was honored on the 7th of February was a unit, not any one man in it, a battalion. So put the number in the comments. Somebody reading it will recognize it, and that is how a unit stops being paperwork.